Hey friends out there in YouTube land, I'm Robert Hamm with roberthamphotography.com, and today we want to talk about another cool camera, the Fuji X-Pro1. Now this is not a review by any means, it's just part of the fact that I love this camera, so I want to talk about it. The X-Pro1 is a really cool professional body that was brought out by Fuji in 2012, and it had their first generation X-Trans processor and sensor. What that means, or the EXR processor and the X-Trans sensor. What that means is specifically Fuji designed a sensor that did not use the standard bare arrangement color filter. The reason that that's important is because on very high resolution and things with very consistent linear patterns, you would see a lot of moire in the bare pattern, in the bare filter. So what Fuji did was created a different type of color filter that was more randomized, and that cut the need for an anti-aliasing filter. And an anti-aliasing filter is specifically a filter that blurs your image slightly. The purpose for that is to help reduce moire that you would see from the bare filter, all right? So that was the big thing that Fuji did. At the time the camera was released, it was pretty well received in image quality. In fact, highly received in image quality, but autofocus was mediocre to medium and to bad at best. Low light performance was excellent at its time, and since its release, it's gone through at least 14 major updates to its firmware. Fuji's continued to support this camera for 4 years, and even when the X-T1 was originally introduced, Fuji still referred to this as their flagship model. So that tells you something about their dedication to this camera directly. Another thing that is interesting about this camera is that it has a really awesome hybrid electronic viewfinder. And in the X Pro series, X Pro1, and it has in the X Pro 2, this optical viewfinder can actually be zoomed. A small lens actually comes out over top of the regular lens in order to zoom optically. And you still have your bright view, bright line display. Handling and features overall, I mean, I've shot over 10,000 photos with this camera since I've had it over the past 5 months. I've been taken to the streets hard with this. I've shot 5 weddings with this camera as part of my lineup. Of course, I use an X100S and the X-T1 and a slew of different lenses. And I've got to say, I absolutely love using this camera. Partially because I like optical viewfinders. I didn't realize I liked them as much until the X100S, but now with the X Pro1 and the ability to even zoom optically to some degree, that's really quite cool. I mean, it's really nice. You might think to yourself that because the camera's older, that it's less capable, and I'm here to tell you that that's just not the case. Although I would never consider this a sports camera, for my intents and purposes, I haven't been able to have really great results with the autofocus tracking, like continuous tracking. But for spot, even focusing to capture kids at play, like a portrait session and things like that, this camera has done amazingly well and admirable. Like I said, it's a camera that I use as one of my cameras for weddings that I shoot. So this camera helps earn money for me. Should you buy it? Well, I'll tell you why I bought it. I bought it because just before the X Pro 2 was released, this camera went on sale at B&H for $500. At $500, there was no reason not to purchase this camera. Of course, I already had the lenses. That was for the body only, so I got this unit for 500 bucks. Today, it seems like that price for a new in-box unit has actually jumped quite a bit to around $700 or $800. And it's jumped because Fujifilm has discontinued it. So the only cameras that you're gonna see out there are either refurbished or used ones or whatever new stock was left over. I think you can find it, like I said, on Adorama for about $799, something like that, so around $800. Today, would I pay $800 for the camera? No, I don't think so. I think if I was going to pay $800, I would go and get the discontinued XE2. The XE2 was surpassed by the XE2S, and the main differences, although not all, happen to be just the software that the XE2S is running. There are some physical differences, specifically with button placement, but same processors and everything else. But that's just because for $800 you could get a different camera with more features. If you can find this camera for 500 bucks somewhere or less, it is an excellent buy. Let me just go ahead and take a walk around the camera for those of you not familiar with it. Fuji embraced this retro design, which actually is how photography could be done, in my opinion. It's got a manual shutter control dial, even though this is a variable aperture lens and the aperture changes from focal length, it still has an aperture ring on the lens that allows you to change the aperture. You have a depth of field preview. You can set that so you can actually stop down your aperture if you'd like to see what the depth of field would be. You also have the ability to command your own ISO. You can set your function button, but you have an exposure control right here, exposure compensation up to +or -2. Turning to the back of the camera, we see a big display. The nice part about this display is the pixels are red, blue, green, plus white. And that really adds to its contrast when you're looking at it. To compare it, I like this display better than the one on the X100S. The buttons are placed pretty nicely. Sometimes I find myself hitting these buttons, which was addressed in the X-Pro2 from what I understand. I don't have an X-Pro2. And it takes the contacts or Nikon F1 diopter adjustments. See, I use lenses, I use glasses, and I still enjoy shooting with this camera. When we go down to the bottom of it, you'll see the tripod mount where you also have your battery and your SD card socket. To the side, you have your I/O ports, you know, HDMI and micro USB or mini USB. One of those USBs, I don't even ever use it, and then a flash sync cable. This can only sync at like 1/125th of a second for the flash synchronization speed. And so for when I want to use flash, sometimes I can push it up to 1/250th, but most of the time I just use an ND filter and set my settings. As far as actually using the camera, I really enjoy the optical viewfinder with the 18 to 55 millimeter 2.8-4 lens, because with the optical viewfinder, the bright view lines actually zoom in and out. And I think that's a really great way to get in touch with photography. I've always been attracted to the rangefinder style of cameras, and so this one just speaks to me 100%. I'm very happy with the purchase, and the images that it has are beautiful. If you want to see my full review on the image quality, I've got a 15-minute long video about how I used, about the images that this produced from a day at Busch Gardens. Now that's a 5-part series. All the parts, part 1 through 4, are about 2 to 3 minutes. Part 5, where I'm talking about IQ, really goes into it a little bit longer, which is why it is longer. But if you want to see how this thing tracks in autofocus when you're trying to capture birds in flight, if you want to see how it does with things that are a little bit more predictable, such as roller coasters, if you want to see what it does on stage performances, please view my X-Pro1 video log about that. I've got it on there, and it's really, really great. And that playlist is a good one, and it'll tell you all about it. When I use this camera, I use the iFi Mobi Pro card in order to transfer the images from here onto my cell phone so I can see right away or share if I choose. I generally shoot in JPEG plus RAW, but I absolutely love the JPEGs out of this camera. Comparing this to my X-T1, there is something different about this camera and the images that it produces. It's not quite bad, it's not quite good, it's just different. Fuji X-T1 images seem to be very clean, almost clinical. These images have a little bit more character to them, and I don't know how to explain it because it shouldn't be any difference. Maybe it's just placebo and I think it's a great camera, so I feel that way. By far, the X-T1 is superior to this camera in everything from focusing, ISO, low light, processing, the whole ball of wax. But there's something about some of the just idiosyncrasies of this camera that are absolutely gorgeous, and I love it. Guys, I hope that you've enjoyed this look around my Fuji X-Pro1. I've enjoyed shooting with this camera. Like I said, I've clocked over about 10,000 shutter clicks with this thing, used it on 5 weddings, and I take it with me everywhere. The only other camera that I use more than this is my Fuji X100S. I use all 3 of these cameras for pro gigs and pay, but the one camera that I carry with me everywhere, the Fuji X100S, is slightly being edged out by the X-Pro1. More on that later. Once again, I'm Robert Hamm with roberthamphotography.com. You can catch me on Twitter at RobHammPhoto. You can find me on both Facebook and YouTube at /RobertHammPhotography. Don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe. And as always, stay shooting, my friends.